executive directors, we have boards of directors who are often resistant, we have a complete lack of time to do anything like sit down and write something down, of course. But my personal favorite, and the reason most frequently cited, is, well, we can't write a plan. The election's going to change everything. Or, you know, the climate changes every time we have a victory or a setback, and we can't write a plan. We have to throw it out in 6 months or 3 months. It doesn't make sense. I don't know how many of you that sounds familiar to, but it's certainly something I used to believe was true. Over the past 5 or 6 years especially, you know, we've all learned to spin on a dime. We've had ballot measures and court cases and anti-gay legislation, and it's all come so fast and furiously that it really can seem ludicrous sometimes to try to plan for things when so much that's happening feels beyond our control. But over the same span of time, I've learned that this crazy, kind of messy time of historical flux it's exactly the moment that we need to plan, that we do need to plan. So that's my first piece of advice. If you don't have a plan, write one, and write it now. And I want to tell you just a few reasons why this is so important and so critical to your work. And there are many reasons, but here are the ones I think will be somewhat the most compelling to you. The first reason is that if we're always in reactionary mode as a movement, we're never going to be able to move forward and focus on proactively achieving our goals. Instead, we'll be forever stuck defending ourselves against anti-gay attacks. And let's face it, the people who don't like queers have a lot more money than we do. So without a clear roadmap for achieving equality, we will just never have the focus to pass the legislation that we need to pass. Second, plans give our work structure, and they ensure that it continues even during times of transition and crisis. You are all working in organizations where the average tenure of an executive director is right about 2 years. 2 years. If every new executive director, and I know you're laughing because some of you are like, okay, well, I have another 2 months. But if you have a plan, if every new executive director comes into the organization and has to build a plan from scratch, you know, it's no wonder we often feel like we're running in place and not moving forward, because we have to start over to figure out what strategic path is. Third, and this is interesting, and I'm interested to see ultimately how this impacts many of you, but I think plans improve our working relationships with and leverage the resources of our allies and partners. Because if we have a plan, we know how our allies can best support our work, and so do they. I will mention, you may have noticed, we've had some tension between state and national organizations in our movement. And this is something that we all struggle with and we all really want to resolve. And strong plans can do that. They can help alleviate that tension because everybody sees how they can plug into a shared goal. And when everybody understands that and can see how they're working together, there aren't organizations over here implementing their own strategies that turn out to undermine some of your work, even though that wasn't the intent, or you're like, why are they doing that? We're already doing that. So there are redundancies that happen as well. So a good plan brings all of your stakeholders together, and it maximizes the resources available for achieving the goals you share. So finally on the plans, in case I still haven't convinced you, a good plan will increase the resources available to you. It just will. Funders, whether they're individual donors or they're institutional funders, want to invest in success. They want to invest in something that they know will achieve the goals that you all have. Now, there might be a few funders out there who are completely charmed by your pitch or your cute new development director or intern. But most will be, and we know that's true, we know which funders we send to those folks too. But most funders are going to be most impressed by a well thought out strategic plan that lays out your goal, your strategies, your partners, your timeline, and your budget. That's what's going to get you investment in your organization and your work. By showing people on paper how you're going to implement the vision that you have for achieving equality. So now you see why providing planning support is such an important Federation program. helps you increase resources, helps you better leverage the resources available to you, and so enough said about that. I want to talk also about the second federation goal, because it's no less important. And in some ways, it's evolved over the years. That vision of a coordinated national strategy that we adopted 6 years ago is even more important today. Back then, we thought of a coordinated strategy as something we needed to do to address all these ballot measure campaigns that were happening all over the country, and we were completely overwhelmed, and we thought, we need some help. There needs to be a plan, a strategy around how we do all this work in the states at the same time. And also keep in mind, we're starting to think about this during the Bush years, and most states were really focused on work in their own states and not at the federal level, but within their states. Very few state organizations at the time were actually active in the federal arena, both because we had national organizations who were doing work on the federal level, and also because there really wasn't a lot happening on the federal level during that time that we could certainly plug into and work on. And most importantly, because state organizations have never had all the resources that they need to do what they wanted to do in their own states. But over the past 6 years, a lot has changed. A whole lot has changed. And as I lead the Federation, I want to challenge you to think very seriously about the role of the Federation and of each of your organizations in the work for equality at the federal level. And I do understand what I'm asking. I know many of your boards have voted against or otherwise resisted taking on a role when it comes to federal work. Believe me, I understand you don't want to send out yet another action alert for ENDA when members of Congress keep making and breaking promises about when it's going to move. So I get that. And I certainly don't blame any of you for keeping your focus on the work of your state, because that is your mission and your first priority. But here's the thing. For the first time, since many of us have been doing our work in the states, what happens at the federal level can actually matter to us a great deal. For the first time ever, what happens at the federal level could actually have a significant impact, for better or for worse, on what you were able to accomplish in your state. And I want to give you 2 examples of how you all, state leaders, made a significant contribution to the strategy of our movement at the national level, and why it matters so much that you did. As many of you will recall, the Federal Employment Non-Discrimination Act had been languishing in Congress for years when it looked like it might actually pass the House of Representatives in 2007. In fact, our great ally, Congressman Barney Frank, thought it would pass if we just took transgender people out of the legislation. Like many legislators and strategists in the states before him, he argued that we could pass a separate bill later that covered gender identity and expression and protected transgender people. So, as many of you will recall, our community was predictably torn. Is it better to protect some people now, or to protect no one now in order to protect all of us later? The issue split our community and resulted in a great deal of angry blogging, angry donors, and organizational rifts. But state leaders did not hesitate. You all knew that excluding transgender people from legislation is a strategy that simply does not work. It does not work because once you pass legislation that only addresses sexual orientation discrimination, it is no simple matter to go back to pass legislation for the heavier lift that addresses gender identity discrimination. We know this from our experience in state legislatures. We've learned that instead of planning on an extra year or 2 to pass a fully inclusive bill, leaving transgender people out means you may then have to spend decades trying to pass a bill that addresses discrimination based on gender identity. So even if you ignore the moral implications of excluding the group of people in our community who suffer the most and greatest harms from employment discrimination, strategically the non-inclusive strategy just does not make sense. So you all, state organizations and the Federation, took a really strong stand in 2007, and you changed the conversation completely. You stood up against an ENDA that was non-inclusive, and you got your constituents to stand up. You got Congress to back down from trying to take the easy path and Well, there have